It's time we talked about the battle over Morgellons. Welcome to the Film Fair Podcast. I am Chris Gore. I am pleased today to bring on the director of Skin Deep, The Battle Over Morgellons. Director Pi Ware is here to talk to us about his documentary currently on Amazon Prime. Pi, tell us about this documentary. It's fascinating. I really enjoy watching medical documentaries, mainly because it's not about me. And
well, that's good that you shouldn't be watching medical documentaries about you. Otherwise,
right.
you're having a big time
what I
health
mean
issue.
Yeah, well, what I mean is that it makes me feel fortunate that I'm not in the situation that people in your documentary are in. Morgellons is I would describe it as a rare disease that wasn't even really acknowledged as a disease. How did you become familiar with the topic and get to know the people that are the subjects in your documentary?
So Morgellons disease is considered by a lot of the medical industry to be something that's all in a patient's head. So it shares a lot of commonalities with other diseases like chronic fatigue syndrome or chronic Lyme disease, where there's thousands and thousands of people suffering and showing evidence of real biological disease, yet the medical community says, no, that's just in your mind. And I heard about this through research into chronic Lyme disease after I saw the documentary Under Our Skin. And I thought, well, this is kind of a pattern that I've seen. When I was a kid, my uncle had ulcers, right? And we were told that he needed Freudian analysis to uncouple the unconscious reflex between his mother giving him candy as a child when he would cry, and now when he would experience stress, his stomach would create gastric juices that would create an ulcer. And that was the reason he had an ulcer, according to the doctors back in the 1980s. But it was actually a bacterial infection, and that's widely understood now. And this pattern of medical denialism, of seeing new evidence, and then the industry saying that's BS, it's all in the person's head, it's psychosomatic. I've seen that happen throughout my life in many different diseases. And when I saw Morgellons disease, which has actual fibers coming out of people's skin, evidence, physical evidence, I thought that's the end all be all. That is the greatest example of medical denialism in the world. And let's really look into this. So I did an investigative documentary about it.
Well, it's fascinating because if you think about it, every disease may have its skeptics in the beginning, right?
Sure.
Like any disease that's discovered. I mean, you mentioned ulcers with your uncle, like that's. But with this disease, yeah, I mean, the pictures that you show and you cover certain people that have suffered with this, and you see the physical effects. It's right there in front of you. I don't understand why the skepticism. One interesting aspect you follow in this documentary, and I can't believe you got this on camera, you follow this one doctor who is so, you know who I'm talking about.
Sure.
He's so
Dr. Feldman is a dermatologist.
He's so annoying and full of himself. And you see him, he's got this little rap that he does, and he thinks he's being funny. It's like beyond dad jokes. It's so bad. And it's so he's so inappropriate with his patients. It's mind numbing. And you see that he is trying to, I just, first of all, I'm shocked that he agreed to be on camera and you got footage of him, but how did you get him? He's one of the skeptics of Morgellons, and yet he's in the doc. And I don't think does he even know he comes off poorly? I was surprised.
Dr. Feldman's one of the most interesting characters I've ever come across in documentary filmmaking. And I thought, this guy has to be on camera because he wanted to share his views on the subject. And as I started interviewing him, I found he was fascinating in that he's a doctor, a dermatologist, who doesn't have real empathy for his patients, but knows that he has to project a persona of having empathy if he wants to receive good online reviews from his patients. So he created a persona. And, when you have 5 or 10 or 15-minute consultations with patients and you're a doctor who projects a persona of empathy, that works fine. He has a shtick that he repeats. It seems off the cuff, but it's very much rehearsed. And that's fine for these short sessions. And the movie tests his persona when he goes to the Morgellons disease conference in Austin, where it's filled with hundreds of patients who feel they've been abused by the medical community. And Dr. Feldman gives a presentation about Morgellons disease, and he's just so tone deaf to their abuse by the medical industry, the medical denialism that exists in their lives, and he makes jokes that are just so insensitive that it kind of creates this huge ordeal and this blow up of activism at the actual at the conference, and he gets a lot of heat. It's a pretty amazing scene, and it was incredible to watch go down as he just isn't aware of how he can come across. And I think a lot of doctors suffer from that. And so he's kind of a stand-in for, scientists who become doctors who don't have people skills, but fake it to make it. And that works for a little while, but it certainly doesn't work when you're up against the ropes and you're really forced to hear people's stories in a controversial subject matter like Morgellons disease.
Well, he definitely lacks total self-awareness. It shows that in the medical field, you're lucky if you get a doctor that has really good bedside manner, but he really seemed like someone who was completely disconnected from the people that he interacted with in a way like it's like he loaded a program into his brain about how to come off as being authentic when he's being completely inauthentic with everyone he interacts with. That speech at the end that he gives, oh my God, I mean, it's just, and then his interactions with people after, I'm shocked. Where did you find one of the big goals with a lot of the people in the film that have been afflicted with Morgellons, the woman who lost her husband tragically, not from Morgellons, she suffers from Morgellons. The goal is to get it recognized as a real disease. How did you find her, and how did you gain her trust to follow her journey throughout the film?
So the film focuses on Cindy Casey. She is a registered nurse, and she got all the symptoms of Morgellons disease, and she had the disease for years and years, and would go to her fellow physicians who were stumped by the whole thing. And what she had in her husband that she met was an advocate, was somebody who stood by her and fought for her. And when she lost that, she was thrust into the kind of leadership role of this community. And so she runs an organization called it's morgellonsdisease.org, but it's called the Charles E. Holman Morgellons Disease Foundation, named after her late husband. And I found that online, and I called her, and we had many conversations, and I gained her trust, and she invited me to film at the Morgellons disease conference in Austin, Texas. And I went back 4 years in a row and met a lot of the patients and started showing them smaller cuts of what I was doing as I was filming, and sort of reflecting their stories back to them. And I told them, look, I want to do a balanced approach, right? Because there's a lot of controversy around Morgellons disease. If you look online, particularly on YouTube, you can find tons of conspiracy theories around Morgellons disease. And the reason that you find so many conspiracy theories is because the disease itself is ill-defined. It's kind of mysterious. The medical community has yet to form consensus on what it is. And so there's just ample opportunity for conspiracy theorists to grab onto this and say, oh, it's the government trying to control my mind using chemtrails that create nanotechnology into my skin and control my brain, and these sorts of just far-fetched ideas. So, I wanted to get rid of that kind of storytelling and focus on the science that's coming out. There's all these papers done by researchers like Marianne Middleveen and Raphael Stricker, and we cover that in the film, that show evidence of the fibers, not fibers that are made out of textile materials, but fibers that are made out of proteins produced by the body. I'm talking about collagen and keratin. So there's proof that these fibers are made by the body, but the medical industry just doesn't believe it. So why would they look further at it? And so the film is meant to not just show Morgellons disease is real, but to show there's a pattern of medical denialism, and we need to bring this pattern into the larger focus, to the larger conversation about healthcare. As you can see, COVID is being denied by a lot of people online. If you have friends on your Facebook feed that say this is a giant hoax, you can see patterns of medical denialism happening right here, right now, with much more well-known diseases that we're all dealing with. But it's happened for years, for decades, for centuries, and it's time for Morgellons disease to get its due.
I kind of feel like I have a mistrust of the medical industry for one reason, and that's money. We've seen how the opioid crisis has devastated communities by overprescribing pain medication. So I do kind of come with a little bit of skepticism myself. I'm still going to wear a mask. Don't worry. Um, I, you know, I just think it's like it's such an easy thing to do. I don't understand why it's been. I do understand, I guess, why it's been politicized, but it's such a simple thing to do, to just wear a mask. I didn't realize that medical denialism was such an I mean, now I see it, right? Like with Morgellons, it's clear from your documentary. With what's happening with COVID, it's clear. I have seen the debates amongst my friends. So
I mean,
so
it's something that's happened for years. If you even look
yeah,
back at like autism, so, and I'm not even talking about vaxxers, I'm talking about in the 1950s and 60s, autism was based on what was called refrigerator mothers. So if a child was autistic, there was a blaming of the mothers for being so cold and unfeeling that they would create children like this. It wasn't even something that was considered medical. It was, again, an environmental, a psychosomatic, something that was created by the environment rather than a genetic or a biological source. So, lupus is denied. Over 50% of lupus patients hear from their doctors that their symptoms are in their heads. And that's a 2018 statistic. So it's happening and has happened all over the place, and it needs to stop, and it needs to stop not just the denialism, but the victim blaming that can go along with the denialism.
well, you see that happen in your documentary. You see the patients that are afflicted with Morgellons, and they show. I don't see how you could fake it. It just seems so obvious. This you see this the effects of it, and some of it's very difficult to look at. I mean, it's so where are we at with Morgellons at this point? Your film has certainly brought things to light. It's certainly um, spread knowledge about this. Where are we at in terms of its recognition as an actual disease?
Well, I've been tracking it since 2015, and if a Google search is any indication of how it's changing, I think there's a wider acceptance. The research that's being done, in part funded by the Charles E. Holman Morgellons Disease Foundation, which is patient-powered. So we're talking about a patient-powered research movement, has been able to change the conversation a bit. So if you look at Wikipedia, it's changed in its definition over the 5 years. If you look at the Mayo Clinic's definition of Morgellons disease, it has shifted over the past 5 years to include the new evidence pointing to a link between the causative agent of Lyme disease. I'm talking about a bacteria. It's called Borrelia burgdorferi, or just the Borrelia spirochete. It's like this little corkscrew bacteria that causes Lyme disease. That's appeared in like 99% of all Morgellons disease cases that they've studied. So it looks to be a probable causative agent of Morgellons disease as well. So that's becoming more popular. The conversation is changing a bit, little by little. And hopefully the documentary Skin Deep will be part of that conversation changing movement forward.
Well, Pi, thank you so much for being on the Film Threat podcast today. I also want to thank our sponsor, Storyblocks. If you're a filmmaker, go to storyblocks.com/filmthreat. Tools for filmmakers will help you complete your documentary film, just like Pi did with Skin Deep. Pi, where else can people get information about the film? I know it's now on Amazon Prime, but where else?
It's streaming on Amazon Prime, and it's on all major streaming, all major video on demand platforms like iTunes and Google Play and Microsoft. But you can find every piece of information and all the links at morgellonsmovie.org. That's MORGELLONS movie.org.
Great. Pi, thank you for being on the Film Threat podcast with us today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Big fan of yours, man, for years.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right.